You ready to do it?
Ready to go.
All right, Paul. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Paul Colaianni. Paul, welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Honored.
Awesome. So Paul is a behavior and relationship coach and the host of the Overwhelmed Brain and Love and Abuse podcasts. He failed at all of his romantic relationships until he figured out that he was the common denominator for all of his problems. At the start of his divorce, he went on a journey of reflection, self-discovery, healing, and study to become the coach and teacher he is now. Today, he lives in Atlanta, Georgia with his fiancée, Asha. Paul, welcome.
Thank you again.
So before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
The beautiful area of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I was in the New England area for the first part of my life, 13, 14 years, and then I moved around a lot. And then I kind of went to where you are in Oregon. I stayed there for a few years. I went to California, went to Texas.
Wow.
Florida for a while, and now I'm finally settling in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow, interesting. All right. So as I was saying kind of before we started here, when I read your bio, I was like, oh my God, this is very similar to mine. But so how did all this start for you? How does someone like yourself become kind of a relationship coach, doing 2 podcasts? How did this start?
Oh my God, that's a loaded question. I think it starts with your history. I mean, for me, I had a lot of dysfunction growing up, alcoholic household, and I took a lot of bad coping mechanisms with me into my adult relationships because of what I learned from my mom. She was a people pleaser, and of course, the alcoholic stepfather. And I didn't know how to be in relationships. I didn't know how to be healthy. I didn't know how to love in a healthy way. And so I would be hurtful and emotionally abusive and judgmental and critical. And I drove my partners away, kept driving them away. And finally I get married and I'm thinking, this is it. You know, once you're married, all right, this is it. You're committed and it's forever and I don't have to worry about it anymore. Nobody's going to leave me when they're married, right? And so, and on year 4 of the marriage, she was feeling depressed and all of this was starting to come to a head again where my partner's going to leave me. And it was just hitting me like, why do people keep leaving me? And so all this time I'd already learned a little bit about hypnosis and psychology, and I've been learning about all this other stuff. And I started to get into coaching and things like that. While all this was happening, I wasn't healed, but I was helping others heal. And so my divorce happens and it finally hit me. Like you said, I'm the common denominator of all my relationship issues, all my problems. And that's when I decided to just stop being in relationships. So I just said, that's it. I'm not going to be in a relationship until I figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time I got into a relationship, it was a replacement for what I needed to do for myself. Okay, she's going to make me happy. No, she's going to make me happy. I kept seeing or looking for the source of my happiness outside myself. And so all of this stuff started coming up, my experience, my studying, my certifications and coaching and things like that. All of it came to a head and I realized I've got to apply all this to myself and get this working inside myself, do some healing and move forward knowing that I have this past that I need to kind of heal through and turn it into something that I can help others with. That's what it felt like for me. That's what I felt like I needed to do. And that's when everything started changing for me, is moving outward after I healed the inner self. And a little quick side story, I was actually, working in technology for a long time, and I was working at this hospital on the computers and stuff. And I just knew that I was working as a subcontractor. I just knew that the manager kept telling me, you're going to have a permanent position here. So this is kind of gets into the overwhelmed brain stuff. You're going to have a permanent position here. And so after a year and a half of working there, when my subcontractor contract was ending, I asked that same manager, okay, what's the position? Let's do this. I'm ready. And he said, well, just keep an eye on the job boards and we'll see what happens. And my heart sank. And so I knew at that point I had to take control of my life and start doing something for myself, because I didn't want to be at somebody else's liberty. And that's when I started thinking, okay, I've dabbled too long. I've got to make this serious. I started the blog, I started the podcast, and ever since 2013, that's what I've been doing up to this point.
Wow, wow. So you, thank you for sharing that, by the way.
Thank you.
You said early on that, you talked about your dysfunctional family and your upbringing, and obviously was playing out in your relationships. You talked about your marriage, and around year four, things. What were you doing specifically? Do you feel that maybe wasn't healthy?
Oh, I know everything I was doing. Not only feel, I know it. In fact, I've been writing about it for the last few years. I have a program to help others not do those things. But I was quite literally focused on my partner. Like I could treat everyone else in the world as my best friend, but my partner, she couldn't really be good enough for me.
Mm,
So everything she did that I didn't like my wife, I would give her hell for eating junk food because I didn't want her to gain weight, which would make me unattractive, which is very selfish for me to look at that. And so I was critical, I was judgmental. I gave her the silent treatment, not the good kind where you're processing and trying to figure stuff out, but the
mhm,
bad kind where you're withholding love and making them feel really bad so they dote on you and they try to make up for it and stuff like that. So a lot of manipulation, a lot of emotionally abusive behaviors, but very specifically, um, I was just very critical of what they did. So my partners over the years. And so I would, yeah, like if like I remember my girlfriend, my first girlfriend coming home with a tattoo and me being somewhat supportive saying, "Wow, that's great." And then saying something like, "I don't like it, but it's nice."
mhm,
And it's an honest thing to say, but it's also something that can tear someone down because that's a lifetime commitment they just made with a tattoo. And all those little things that happen were all selfish. It was always me focused on someone else doing something for me, changing for me. And it after my or during my divorce, I realized that's what I was doing. I realized my focus is always outside of me. It's never inside. It's never what I want. It's how I can change that person. Because if I really don't want that person, maybe I should leave that person and do something for me. But I'd rather control them and change them so
mhm.
they would stay with me. So that was my whole deal, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, how I was the common denominator. And that's when I started focusing on what I want for my life. And there's a lot involved with that we may or may not get into, but that really did start my process of healing and starting to accept people. This is part of my healing, accept them for who they are. And if I can't accept them, I'll make it my problem, not theirs, because I
Mhm.
always made it their problem and tried to change them.
I mean, that's a huge realization, and it takes a lot of friggin' courage to, first of all, to get on a friggin' podcast and say all that. That stuff is come on, it's awful. A lot of us engage in it, whether we want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
But I think to have the wherewithal to be able to have that self reflection and self awareness to say, this is what I'm doing, and then to take steps to change it. I mean, that's it's one thing to read about it, but it's a really different thing to do it. So
So
kudos
freaking
to
true.
yeah, I mean, kudos to you, man. I mean,
No,
it takes a
thank you.
lot of balls to do it. So how did you start healing? What did you do?
Yeah, so at the end of my marriage, that was the time. The first thing I wanted to do as my marriage was ending was find somebody else to be the source of my happiness. It's always looking for the source of my happiness, always somebody that needed to satisfy me. And I have high standards, so here I am trying to make people fit those standards. And so when we separated for a while and she went to California, I stayed in Oregon. And during that time, I had these thoughts. Like one of the very first things I did, I remember, was pretend to be her, practice empathy, pretend to be her. And I sat in her shoes and I saw myself doing the things I did to her in my mind, visualizing this. And I said, well, how would you feel if you were her? And I'm thinking, well, geez, I just want to enjoy this donut. I just want to enjoy it. It tastes good. It feels good to sit there and have a sugar high or whatever. It didn't, all the endorphins. And then I saw my look. I saw myself. Oh my God! It's just, I feel it now. I feel so awful in her space and in my. I can feel it from her perspective, thinking, this person's supposed to love me. This person's supposed to give me unconditional love, or at least do the best they can, not
Mm-hmm.
criticize me, not put me down. They're supposed to be my supporter, my partner in life. And here I am over there criticizing and judging, or giving her the look, or being silent and not telling her where I am. And she feels so lost, like, where did he go? And so here I am being my wife. And that was the very first step I took into empathy, real empathy, because I always thought myself as an empathetic person. Hey, I'm great. I'm great. But I was screwing everything up. And so I stepped into that empathy, the empathetic role, and it really just highlighted everything for me. And I felt, honestly, I felt so sick. I was going to vomit, because I, for the first time, realized what I was doing. It just hit me. And I think your question kind of lies on the part of, well, how did you get to that transition? How do you go from being the person that does this stuff to being the person that's, doing the opposite, or healing? And um, I think it finally, I hit the bottom. I finally hit bottom. I realized marriage was supposed to be the final frontier for me, because
Mm-hmm.
I had all these relationships. They screwed up. Oh, they're my girlfriend, so I guess that's how it's supposed to work until you commit. But after several great relationships failed with great people, and now this marriage is failing, I finally had to admit that there's something wrong with me. And that took hitting the bottom. I just had to hit the bottom. I think when we have that, you've probably heard this or say it yourself, when you have that breakdown, you finally can have a breakthrough, and then you can start, like, getting on the deep end of the pool. You're going down and down and down, and then you hit the floor and you just can't hold your breath anymore, so you push back up. So it feels like I had to start. That's where I felt like I was. I was at the bottom of the pool, finally had momentum, or the leverage, or whatever you call it, when you push your feet off the pool and go up. And that's the start of this whole thing. Just realizing that the bottom had hit. You're not going to get any lower. I'm losing relationships left and right. It's not going to get any lower. And so I stepped out of selfish mode. Once I stepped out of selfish mode, what's in it for me? What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked myself, what can I do to make this person's life happy? And I started thinking, how can I support their happiness? And that actually became my new definition of love. How, when you support someone's happiness, when you support their
Mm-hmm.
decisions, even when you disagree with them, when you can support, the decisions they make. If you can support their decisions and support their happiness, then that shows true connection and love for someone, because you're letting them be who they are. You're accepting them. So that whole thing is just, it's like you said. You said it was it's hard. It takes balls, like you said, and uh, I don't want to play the victim on that, but it was going from the life I knew to the life I had no clue about. And so I lived my life as this manipulator, perpetrator, emotionally abuser, and decided to change that. And it was hard as hell, because I had some old traumas to deal with, and I had some old programming to change. And I tell other people, it's going to change your life so much. You're not going to know who you are, and you're going to remember who you were, but it's such a big change that you're afraid to step into that, who you're going to be. And so that was a real big thing too, and I had to work through that as well.
How did the overwhelmed brain come about? That this platform, you've got a book, you've got a podcast. What did you want to do going into that when you created that?
This was right at that hospital job when my heart sank. I thought I was going to be working there permanently. I thought this was going to be my lifestyle, my livelihood. And I took 2 days to be depressed and mope and just realize, oh, it's not going to work out. What can I do? I started listening to podcasts. It was the very first time I actually heard a podcast, in 2013 or something like that. Yeah, early 2013. And I realized, wow, I could enjoy this. Everyone says, you have a radio voice, go on radio. And I thought, podcast, okay, might be able to do that. And then I said, well, how do I know what to talk about? I'm not even, I'm just kind of blind right now. And I listened to one guy say, well, what do you like talking about the most? I said, well, personal development and emotional intelligence. I love talking about all that stuff. I could talk about it for hours. He said, that's what you should do a podcast about. And I said, well, that's great. Okay. Now what? The overwhelmed brain. Where does that name come from? I was in a mastermind with other podcasters, and somebody was grilling me. Well, what do you want to call it? Who is your listener? And I said, I just want to talk about people that are overwhelmed. They're always overwhelmed. And so that kind of like, okay, the first thing you do is look for the .com. The overwhelmed, the overwhelmed mind. No, that's taken. The overwhelmed. Oh, okay. The overwhelmed brain. That worked. Hey, and then it stuck from that point on. And I actually started with a blog for 6 months and then moved into the podcast right after that. And that's where it sprung forth from there.
So who would you say the podcast is for? I mean, aside from people who have overwhelmed brains, but more specifically, what are you hoping to, or what's your message in a sense?
Yeah, it's funny. It took me 10 years to come up with a one-liner. And the one-liner, I told my fiance, Asha, I said, my podcast is just about navigating the difficulties of life. She goes, that's your one-liner. I said, oh, okay. That doesn't really cover everything, but it does. But really, to get into the nuts and bolts of that, I always had a problem with personal boundaries. I didn't know my values. I didn't know what was important to me and being in alignment with those values. I didn't know what self-empowerment was. I didn't know about how to deal with people. I didn't know how to confront. I know all this stuff I didn't know. I wasn't taught because my family didn't know how to do it. And I don't know if you've ever visited your family after a lot of personal growth, but you realize how much you've grown. Not that they're, devolving or anything like that, but you just realize how much you've changed around people you've known or known you all your life. And so I stepped into that with the personal boundaries and the values. I had to learn all of that myself and get to understand how to make decisions that were right for me, how to create the life I wanted, even though it sounds a little hokey, but I really wanted to start changing how I responded to people. I wanted to start changing my behaviors because it really sucked when you wanted to say no and you said yes. It really sucked. For me, it was like I didn't want to just be the people pleaser anymore. And so that's what I teach on the show. I just want to give people the tools and the right responses for them, the right responses that they come up with that I can help guide them to, and be able to honor themselves and say what's on their mind and love others while you're honoring yourself. It's not about against them, it's for you. And just be able to align with your values, what's most important to you, and make decisions based on that, because that's how you stop yourself from sabotaging yourself, is being in alignment with what you value most. And some of that's risky and scary, but I try to help guide people through all that.
Yeah, I think that's super inspiring for me, and I know for a lot of people too. And it's, as we all know, it's not easy, and it takes work. Work. It does. It takes
Is work.
intentionality. It takes commitment. Um, Now, one thing I want to talk about here is kind of the obvious fact that, we're both men here, and there's a lot of talk now in our culture about, what does it mean to be a man and toxic masculinity and all this stuff. What are your thoughts on personal growth and men and men in our culture now at this time? And obviously it's a very textured time and there's a lot going on, but how does this play out for you?
Are we talking about the Barbie movie now?
Which I have not seen.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't give it away. But there's a lot of talk about toxic masculinity in that movie, and it's a very educational movie. And it's interesting that you asked this question because I was listening to one of your episodes before our talk to make sure I'm kind of prepared to, want to see if you threw any left field questions at me, like, what are your favorite books? I'm like, I don't know what my favorite books are. and so I listened to you and I realized, okay, this guy's emotionally connected. And the reason I know that is because of the inflection in your voice, your animation. And it's just, I can resonate with that. And so I believe that is such an important aspect of not being toxic, is being emotionally connected. Not that some emotionally connected people aren't toxic, but to be able to learn what you know and connect with people in a way where you aren't afraid to be animated. You aren't afraid to show emotions. Where you aren't afraid, like every time my voice goes up, I'm in a different mood, and my voice goes down, I'm a little down. So I love when people can access that. And there are people that have trouble accessing that. They don't know what it's like because they've never tried it. I mean, you've heard people that are just kind of monotone and they just talk like this the whole time, and you're not sure where they are or how to connect with them. Not that they're bad people. So I think that a toxic masculinity is something that happens when we're taught not to feel. And so what do we do with that? Like, I have all this anger I want to say, but I want to speak it in a way that's healthy, but I don't know how to do that. I was never taught that, or I never practiced. So what am I going to do instead? I'm going to punch somebody in the face, or I'm going to yell at my kids, or I'm going to smack them. And that's how it comes out. I really think if men are taught to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable, first of all, you're going to bond with other men. You're going to bond with other men in a lot of ways. Yes, okay, you go play golf together, but you're going to find out that also that your ideal partner is going to appreciate it. Your ideal partner is going to appreciate that you're emotionally connected, because a lot of ideal partners don't like emotionally disconnected people because they don't know where you are. It's like when I used to do the silent treatment. Where the hell are you, Paul? I'm not there. And I believe when you start practice being vulnerable, like, oh crap, I had a bad day at work today and it really hurt, and it made me feel like I might get fired, like my boss might yell at me or whatever because I did something stupid, and that is like a deeper thing that a lot of men, or some men, don't want to share. And because they don't share, what happens to that internal energy? So that's how I see it. I don't know if you have an opinion on this yourself, but that's how I see it, is that the internal energy is going and going.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. I think that it's I think a lot of men look, I feel that a lot of men feel very fearful of that word vulnerability. You know,
Yeah,
it's equated with weakness. Um,
right.
we've known that for a long time, but it's just freaking tiring to me, you know, and it's
I love it.
refreshing
It's true.
when we're able to express the multiple sides and facets that we are. Jesus.
Yeah. Well, crying at the movie Ghost or some other movie, that's me. I don't know if it's you, but boy, if there's a sad scene, holy crap, I have trouble. I mean, some commercials do that to me.
I was, I was just, you know, what kills me is those little like clips of dogs reuniting with their veterans that they haven't seen for, like, you know, their owners,
Oh
right?
yeah,
The military people, they go away
they've
for a
been
couple
gone
of
for
years
3 years, and
and then
right
they
up at the
come
airport, and the
back,
dog's
right?
like,
Yeah,
wait, I
those
know
those
that
kill
guy
me.
or girl. Yeah.
All right, look. So we've got the overwhelmed brain, and you also got another podcast, the
Yes,
Love and Abuse podcast. When did that come about, and why?
that was 2019, and I was getting tons and tons and tons of questions about relationships and emotionally abusive behavior. I talked about emotional abuse and control and manipulation in my Overwhelmed Brain podcast here and there in different episodes, and people just started pouring the questions toward me. And so I said, okay, I need to create another resource for these people that are asking all these questions. And ever since then, the questions haven't stopped. And I've come to realize, you've probably known this for 2 decades now, I've come to realize that relationships are the most complex thing on earth. and and we relate to people in different ways because we're so different from each other, and we have a lot of similarities. And so I've dedicated the last 4 years on the Love and Abuse podcast, mainly dealing with controlling, manipulation, some narcissism, some antisocial personality disorder, stuff that I am comfortable talking about and that I've worked with clients regarding what they've dealt with. And boy, it's a lot easier to talk about this stuff when you've been some of this stuff, when you've actually done some of it yourself. And I think the listeners, they tune in and they're kind of surprised that I talk about, yeah, I was an emotional abuser. That's wow, you were, and you're admitting it. I said, well, I think it's important. I think it's important to be transparent about it. And they also appreciate that I have that perspective, which I had to learn because I was afraid of just saying I was this. I know you're going to judge me. I was this. It was very scary for me to say that. And we were talking about vulnerability, but vulnerability also gives you strength because I believe once you let the cat out of the bag, they really can't take any
Mm-hmm.
more from you.
Mm-hmm.
This is who I was. This is my bottom of the barrel. If you want to take any more, go for you. There's nothing left. I've given you everything I was, and I even tell you when I still have little moments, here and there, I'll have an emotional trigger moment. Got to cope with it. Got to deal with it. Got to take a step back. And that's how it started in 2019. I just get all these questions. Everyone has a relationship of some sort. If it's not emotional, romantic, it's family, it's platonic, it's work, it's something. Unless you're completely isolated, very few people are, but it does happen. And I think it's even the relationship with yourself. So I cover mainly romantic relationships, but also familiar and other, because all the situations are pretty similar. A lot of situations that we get into are similar. Oh, you didn't honor your boundaries. Why didn't you? Well, I can
Mm-hmm.
honor my boundaries with this person, but not with this person. Well, let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. So that has been a show that I've really enjoyed creating because of the feedback, because I really believe it's helping people. They tell me it's helping them, and I get letters. I swear I don't promote or endorse separation or divorce or anything like that. I just help you get to a decision inside yourself that works for you. And so I really like to guide people with the best decision possible that they make for themselves. But I give them all the knowledge I can. I just try to give them everything they need to know so they can make the right decisions. So there's
Your
the long story.
transparency is not only refreshing, but it's inspiring. I mean, I think when people meet someone and encounter someone and are in the presence of someone who is able to be themselves and comfortable being themselves and to share certain things. Look, we've all got stuff going on.
Yeah.
I think in on your website you said something to the fact that at one point you just couldn't believe how much abuse there was out there, or something to that effect. And that's been my experience too. Look, it's the nature of human beings. We've got stuff going on. And when we're able to share in that and realize that, yes, and move on and become aware of it and try to correct it, it becomes very empowering.
Yeah.
Let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Paul Colianni of the Overwhelmed Brain and the Love and Abuse podcast. So, as we kind of wind down here, give me a snippet of who comes to you. You coach people.
I'm not an active one-on-one coach anymore. I actually do programs now. So
Okay.
yes, people do come for me. Mostly where I spend my time is helping the emotional abuser who wants to heal and the victim of emotional abuse who wants to get their power back, get their life back. And what does that involve? So like I have the program for the people that want to heal from that, and I have the workbook that and the Facebook groups and stuff like that. So the type of people, I think that's what you're asking, that will come to me are for specific programs that I do right now are it's typically like I'll start with the victim side. I don't really like to call them victims. I do it for brevity. The victim of emotional abuse or a difficult, controlling, manipulative relationship, they'll listen to love and abuse and they'll get a lot of tools and how to respond in a way that allows the abusive person to understand where they are and not turn into something that it always turns into, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. How can we respond differently so we have a better a chance of communicating with the person we're with? So the person that they're confused, they don't know what's going on in the relationship, they have trouble satisfying the person, that no matter what they do, it's not good enough. And they think that maybe even it's their fault. I always get like people that say, am I the abusive one? Am I doing something wrong? And so the show, the Love and Abuse show, helps them figure that out. And then the Healed Being program that I run is a very specific to people who find out that they're being emotionally abusive, find out they're being manipulative, find out they're being controlling because the person that they're with says, I've had enough. I've had enough. And usually like 98% of the people that join the program, they had a partner or somebody that said, I've had enough. Either you change or I'm out of here. And so that's when they finally go, oh, you mean my behavior really is bad and you really are going to leave. Oh, and they get it. The light bulbs go off. And then they join the program and I walk them through everything to expect, everything they need to do for themselves. And it is hard for them because it's like saying, hey, you remember you were person A all this time? You're going to be person B from this point on.
So is this an online program, a group program?
Yeah, it is it's actually, you can do it like with an email, like lessons. I have like 75 lessons in this program. And if you do it through email, you can do it that way, or you can join like a course and you can see all the lessons, and you also get the supportive Facebook group. And so we have all of it online. It doesn't meet in person, maybe someday, but not now.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So how do people find out about this, and what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Paul?
Sure. Well, the two programs I have, you can go to loveandabuse.com, loveandabuse.com. And that is my podcast. It also has a link to my program, Healed Being. So that's healedbeing.com if you want to go directly to that. And of course, we've been talking about my podcast, theoverwhelmedbrain.com. And any one of those will kind of lead you to each other. So that's how you can find me and how you reach out to me if you need to.
Awesome. All right. We'll have those linked up at the show notes page here. Paul, awesome, man. Friggin' refreshing and inspiring, really. I mean, I appreciate you coming on here.
No, it's an honor. Thank you for thinking of me and inviting me.
All right, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
All right, man, take care.